breastfeeding her, and I wasn't taking any medicine because of her. But then I couldn't take the pain anymore. The migraines were picking up. The facial twitching was back. It was later on that I began to drop massive amounts of weight, and I mean like 40, 50 pounds, and I was coughing up blood. So I went to my primary care doctor, and I'm like, hey, in the past, all my EEGs have been abnormal, and this is what I'm experiencing. Can we just do an EEG to see if the seizures are back? She said, absolutely. I went to Orlando VA. It was sleep-deprived, and this time, it wasn't seizures. It was slowing in my brainstem.
Which means you were having mini strokes.
Yes. So the next step, I get a call from the neurologist. This young man is very talented, and I like him also. He was taken off of my case, and I was put with the section chief, who is now moved. Now I have a different neurologist. And he's like, hey, we picked up an abnormality in your EEG. Let's do an MRI without contrast. I'm like, okay, you got it. I was told in 2010 that my MRI was normal. That was a lie. So I told Charles, I'm like, this is going to be a piece of cake. It's not going to be any. Well, it came back that I had a whole bunch of problems. So then I get a call back from the same neurologist. It's like, hey, we now need to do an MRA, which is where they scan the blood vessels and the arteries and whatever crap else is in your brain. It's not the tissues, how the blood goes around, like the circle of Willis, all that crap.
Right.
But it's with contrast this time. So come to find out, I had 3 active lesions, with the biggest one being in my brainstem, and the part called the pon. The pon regulates your breathing, your sleeping, your heart, your lung. And so that is now heavily damaged. And they don't know why. They can't tell me why. They can't go in and do a biopsy and cut the scar tissue off, because then that would cause serious problems. The MRI with contrast came back to bright lesions, 2T, whatever the crap that means. They said that my brain has hypertrophy in it. It shows evidence of multiple transient ischemic attacks, which is very uncommon for a woman my age. So I was 37 at that time. Then they kept having to watch it. I had to keep doing repeat MRIs every 6 months. Then I developed a lesion on the back of my optic chiasm, which is the part of your brain that controls what you see, and you can lose your vision over it. So I had to go through testing for that, and then more testing. My hearing came back damaged. It showed that when I looked at various patterns through their machine, that my brain was not processing it correctly, and it showed minor abnormal waves because of how my eyes were transmitting visual images. So they kind of got me stable on that. I started getting optical nerve blocks. They said there's no seizures, and so the slowing in your brainstem, there's really nothing we can do until you have a major stroke. And I was like, oh, that's great. So they put me on aspirin to thin my blood, because that's the #1 contributing factor. When the lesion showed up on the optic chiasm, I had to do a spinal tap. Most of it was unremarkable. It looked really good, but something was off. My RH factor was extremely high. It was 14.7. Normal RH factor is anything below 2. So they submitted my stuff to a rheumatologist. The rheumatologist says, no, I don't think it's rheumatology. And so I believed them. I go for my lungs. I have shortness of breath. I have wheezing. And the War-Related Illness Center, they have 4 of them. And they were like, they told my doctor, test her lungs. My lungs came back with scarring, and my pulmonary function test showed moderate to severe disease. So when all that is going on, I went back to Oklahoma City VA, and I'm like, hey, give me my stuff. I'm going to need that raw data from 2010, 2013, and 2014. The lady in the director's office at that time, she's been fired. She's like, yeah, we deleted it. I'm like, what? So then I called people in authority. I think, yes, Secretary McDonald was still over the VA. And I called and I'm like, sir, they deleted my stuff. He's like, no, they didn't. I'm like, yes, they did. So then that's when the very first investigation kicked up against Oklahoma City VA. And that's when we found out that this woman went in, deleted the raw data. And so now doctors need it to help treat me, and they don't have anything to go off of. The DVA says there's no proof.
Oh yeah, they'll conveniently throw that up. Yeah, they'll conveniently say that because it, once again, supports their
narrative.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. So now you go and you've you're starting to have all of these issues that you would hope you're going to get support for, only be turned around and be told, no, we're not going to take that. Another important note is when you have somebody that's actually supporting you in the VA, all of a sudden they get swapped out. I've experienced that also, where you've got a doctor or a physician assistant or a nurse or what have you who support you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we see this. Yeah, this is a problem and it should be attended to. And then on next thing you know, now you have a new doctor, a new physician assistant, a new nurse, and they reverse that information. So, medicine is a science, which means that it's always evolving and it's supposed to be evolving to make it better. However, when you go there and you're told, yeah, absolutely, you have this issue, and this issue, and, you were healthy before you went in, and it's not like, you went 20 straight years with no time off and doing nothing but putting your life at risk. All of a sudden you have all of these health issues that the VA is now saying, no, we don't want to believe that. So they switch your doctors, they switch in order to get the write-up that they can turn around and use against you in the future.
Yes, it was. Well, this is kind of jumping ahead, but one of the doctors at Orlando VA, he said that I was making my own headache. And so I said, okay, fine. They took me off Topamax. They took me off, there's like a medicine that they give you for migraines. I was already up to 100 milligrams. Sumatriptan. You're only allowed 200 milligrams at a time, like in 24 hours. So I was already up to 100 milligrams of that. They took hydroxyzine. They took the nausea medicine. They took everything. So when I requested service connection for migraines, the VBA came back with, you're not taking anything for it. That you're only taking magnesium. And then I came back with, but they're blaming me. They're blaming me.
Right.
And then, so when I went through the lung thing, I was also blamed. They said that it was my fault because I smoked. And I'm like, no. And so then my PFTs kept declining. I was down to smoking like a pack of cigarettes a month, just for enjoyment. They would not bend either way. My weight was still down. It was stable. And me and my husband went to a meeting with the providers. And I sat there and I watched the chief of staff tell me, well, we're not going to run any more tests because we know they're going to be abnormal, which will lead to more testing. And that made me so mad. I'm like, oh my God. So me and Sean, we opted for his insurance. And so in 2018, that's when everything really started falling apart. When I went to Mayo Clinic, they're like, your lungs are failing. And all those lesions and brain vessels, it's called brain AVMs, with their intravenous malformations, all of that, yeah, that's because you have vasculitis, which is an autoimmune condition. And then I'm sitting there and I'm trying to absorb it. I'm trying to listen. And so Mayo Clinic, not VA, Mayo Clinic put me on 1, 2, 3 different breathers and a pill. If I hadn't gone to them, the VA would probably still not be treating my lung issues.
Right.
Only because of them did the VA say, well, I guess she means business. So then they started prescribing stuff to help me breathe the mucus. Mayo Clinic, they did bronchoscopy. My left lung was so severely inflamed and filled with mucus, they couldn't even get the scope down in it to see if it was okay. And they wrote that in their report. And so the scarring on my left side is growing. The scarring that I have in my right middle lobe is stable, still pretty small, like half a centimeter. But the one on my left side, from the high resolution CT scan, is getting bigger. And the VA's response is, well, we need it to be a little more bigger before we try to take anything out. Are you serious? So I got frustrated and I was like, okay, Mayo Clinic, I don't live in Jacksonville, I live in Orlando. So in Jacksonville, if you're there, they can treat you ongoing. But they're like, we can't do a lung biopsy, we can't do resectioning of the lobes, which is where they would cut out the lobes that are causing the most problems. And we can't do a lung transplant here. You have to be followed very, very closely by a pulmonologist. The complications are very serious. So they cut me loose in January. So my next pulmonary function test, my Delco score, which is diffusion capacity, is how my lungs process oxygen and carbon monoxide. So now I'm called a carbon monoxide breather. There's more carbon monoxide in my blood than oxygen because my lungs are damaged.
Right.
And along the way, I developed pulmonary hypertension. If you take out my brain, take out the vascular issues and all that, the pulmonary hypertension and the lung problems I have is a death sentence. There's no treatment.
Right.
And I was in 2017 when my testing came back all jacked up. This doctor at Orlando VA said, yeah, we need to screen her for pulmonary hypertension. They wrote to me and lied to me in writing and said, your tests are normal. And I believed them. 2018 goes, and they're like, you don't need a cardiologist. Your heart is fine. And I'm like, okay, explain to me this and that. And they're like, that's your lungs. And then they wouldn't say anything. They wouldn't elaborate. They wouldn't explain anything to me. So me and Sean, we went to Vanderbilt University. The VA is not reimbursing any of this. So I went and saw Dr. Miller. He has extensive research education with veterans and service members on burn pit exposure. He looked at my CT scan. He looked at all of my PFT, and I've had about 10 of them now. And he's like, your lungs really are declining. Let me show you this. Restrictive lung disease, it starts out looking like COPD asthma. But as the disease progresses, other numbers become highly inflated, like in the 120%. But then the restricted part, those numbers start to decline. So when I did his pulmonary function test for my lungs, my diffusion capacity was sitting at 52%. He sent me to a gentleman that he knows here in Orlando to follow me because he says that I don't have much longer because my lungs are rapidly declining quicker than normal. He's seen it before, and that service member they lived a couple of more years after that. So I go to the pulmonologist he recommends. Dr. Miller writes up his report. I send it to the VA. The VA is speechless. They don't like him. There's already bad rapport between him and the VA and DOD anyway.
Of course.
And so my weight is stable, but I have a very high pulse with a low blood pressure. And he's like, you need to be on medicine for this atrial fibrillation because the damage will spread, and then there'll be ventricular fibrillation. And he says, that's going to make a death sentence even more sooner. But the VA here told me you don't need no beta blocker for your AFib, and I believe them. Had I listened to the outside doctors and stayed on it, then the pulmonary hypertension I have would have stayed at mild instead of moving up to moderate. So that's their negligence, and they have nothing to say to me.
Of
they don't
course
want to
not.
talk to me.
No.
And I get yelled at by calling the office. And so Dr. Miller wrote it up that I had to be watched, monitored very carefully. I've had 4 exacerbations in the last year and given tons of medicine, steroids to clear out my lungs. And I asked him, I'm like, hey, is this my fault? He's like, no, it is not your fault. He said the disease in and of itself is rare, so rare. And he said, even among service members, it's more common, but it's also rare. He says genetics are involved, your immune system is involved. It's a lot of intricate parts. So when I went to do my last pulmonary function test, in a matter of 2 months, my diffusion capacity went from 52% down to 40.
Yeah.
And the rest of my lungs, they're getting worse. So when I found out everything they did with my claim, Dr. Miller, he wrote that. He said early detection for this disease is critical, but because they said I'm a liar and I'm not a veteran, and then all the fighting I've done over the years, it was basically useless. It was useless, and I grapple with that.
Oh yeah.
It was useless.
Yeah, there's not going to be a day that goes by. I mean, let's recap your brain, your heart, and your lungs. The three of the things that are keeping you alive. I mean, it's not like, hey, I have a blown vein, so it's kind of serious. But they can cut that portion out and connect it, so you can still be okay. Now, with the heart, the brain, and the lungs, and it's progressively getting worse when it could have been caught up early. It is vitally important. It's life or death.
Yes.
It's also important to mention that in 2018, you did receive an email finally saying that there's enough evidence to prove your case about the rape. Whereas, and if you do the timeline, that's longer than a decade of having to basically fight against everyone else who's saying you're a liar. By everyone else, I mean the military, the investigators in the military who are trying to make their job easier by saying, no, she's lying. Now, whether that's because they weren't good at their job or they were covering for a buddy of theirs that was in the battalion, whatever the case may be, but they were found to be incorrect as well. But it's a horrific situation, and it took until 2018 until you finally got okay, all right, we'll admit yeah, there is enough evidence for you to be able to prove that you were raped. Now I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And the fact that it happened to you, I can't even imagine, which is vitally important why most of the time when you hear about somebody moving mountains to help somebody else, it's usually a veteran trying to help another veteran because we understand what we go through and the challenges we face, especially against the VA. You know, there's plenty of people who had a perfectly fine experience in the military, and then their biggest battle is when they turn to the VA for support. Your case, all your symptoms could have been identified, and at least it might not have been cured, but it
would have been slowed.
Absolutely. Significantly. Yes. And you're only 40 years old. It's not like you're 80 and be like, well, I had a good run. I'm 40. I'm not even midway, hopefully, but now you're having to live with accommodating your life and your quality of life around your disabilities. And that's insanity. But it's a reality. And that's what sucks is, you have these issues and the VA doesn't want to acknowledge it because they're using the report saying, no. And as you said, the doctor writes it up this way and they say, no, we have problems with that doctor. No, they don't have problems with that doctor. They have problems with a write-up that counters what they want to hear. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, I can tell you that after I submitted my challenge to CID, that it went all the way up to Secretary of Defense because they were like, how in the heck did she get this information? Because none of it was redacted. So military still has a problem with privacy. So does the VA. And Brigadier General Colleen somebody, I'm sorry, I don't remember her last name, she wrote me a letter back saying, we're going to unfound swearing to a false statement because it's against your constitutional right. So I submitted that and all the pictures and stuff to Misco, which is where my claim was. They still denied it. They said no sexual trauma, no TBI. I was told that my military service in Iraq means nothing.
That's always a pleasure to hear.
And so, they still said no.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
They weren't willing to budge, but Congressman Langford's office got 70%, and that was 2014. Yeah, because Sam was born in 2015. So an attorney took my case, and because the military had not unfounded making a false statement, he sent me an email and he said, you have one of the strangest cases I have ever seen. He said, should the military say you didn't lie, go to the secretary. The secretary can give you equitable relief because the denial is based on you being a liar. They're not saying it didn't happen. They're saying that they're using the investigation that CID did. And he says you have to overcome that. When I did research, I'm the only female in America that jumped through all of their hoops, still to be denied later because my case has political tones to it. It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter.
It really shouldn't. And you're talking to a guy who's unfortunately been battling for well over a decade, all because I had a congresswoman helping me out in the beginning, and she was awesome. However, when she didn't get reelected, that's when all the pressure and all the abuse started on my case. So I absolutely understand, and I hope anybody that's listening also understands that they will target you and they will do everything in their power to make sure your life is a living hell. And they'll continue to say, as you just got done saying, the Secretary of the Army comes back and says, look, no, they're ordering the Commanding General to unfound making a false statement. That means you were telling the truth. Now, you can't get back the last 15 years. However, this is a good beginning to make things better. However, you just lost 15 years of telling the same story without changing anything. But now somebody is saying, hey, we believe you, but the VA is going, no, we're still going to hold true to our decisions, which means your fight is still going.
Well, my biggest thing is that I jumped all the hurdles, all of it, and they're unbothered, unscathered. They don't care, and I've had good Republicans help me. I've had good Democrats also help me, but the people that are in Florida, they do not give a damn. They don't care.
No.
I reached out to Senator Rubio's office to be told that they can't help me, that I need an attorney, that I need to back off. And then Scott, he's not done anything. And the congressional guy, Darren Soto, he's kind of there and then he kind of isn't. I don't know how to explain it. He's done very, very little. I found more support from people outside of my state than people inside of my state.
Which is really sad, because our politicians will definitely use that as their platform to say, I support my veterans and I support this and that.
No,
I've attempted to use some politicians myself, and I've literally sent letter after letter explaining, outlining, doing their job for them. Here's what the VA is doing. Here's my proof. Here's what they said. Here's my proof. What I need you to do is I need you to make your inquiry, but I need you not to say, hey, we're just asking about this guy or this girl. And because the VA is always going to say, because I've got the letters, I keep everything, where the VA says, oh, we're working hard to do so-and-so's case, and we're working hard to process so-and-so's case, and it's on the rating desk right now. And that satisfies the inquiry. So the congressman or governor or senator turns around and goes, here's what we got, which means they put in no effort. And a lot of times you'll find that the liaison for that politician has a buddy in the VA. And that's what they're doing, is they're contacting their buddy saying, hey, we want to know more about this guy. And the VA, they're not going to turn around and say, oh yeah, well, this guy, he's right. We're kind of screwing him over. We're not looking at this test, that test, this doctor's statement or that, but we kind of need you guys to let it go. So what are they going to do? Oh, okay. Well, hey, here's our inquiry and here's the results, which always ended the same way, to the point where they just kept getting upset because I kept supplying them proof and more proof. And the senator's office, the liaison, finally called me and said, what do you want? Just like that. And right? And I turned around and I just literally said, all I want is for the VA to do the right thing. I've supplied everything, documented everything. Everything's in my service medical records. And all I want them to do is actually process it appropriately instead of constantly changing their narrative. And they're like, well, we can't do anything else for you. And so they never did anything for me to begin with. So it's very aggravating. Now, there are some politicians that will, because they don't care what everybody else says, they want to help their veterans. However, there's way too many politicians who are more worried about re-election, so they like where the money comes from. So they tend to say they'll do something, but then they prove otherwise, but you never see that in the news. So everybody thinks, oh, this politician's great. He keeps saying he's doing this for the veterans, and I've never heard anything to the counter of that. So, and you did reach out to Secretary Wilkie and the White House for...
Yes, I did.
For relief.
That White House hotline is useless. Mm-hmm. Those people there, they can't do anything. And so, let's see here. I got an answer. This is what was scary. I got an answer last year. At that time, I had already 50 pending complaints over service connection, privacy, timely medical treatment, all of that. And only one of them got answered. The VA got so aggravated with me, they put a psychologist that I know between me and the VA. Last time that happened, the Department of the Army put in liaison between me and CID. And CID and the Army ended up losing. As a matter of fact, the Army is beyond disgusted with how the VA has treated me. And they wrote it in their decision that I got. And they said most of the issues that I brought up, they can't even address it because it's a Department of Defense issue. But they were like, Ms. Dundathiel, this email is in reference to your inquiries about your service connection, blah, blah, blah. So Michael Missel, he investigated my case, but it's a sealed case, which means I can request it, but it's not available to the public, basically. Not all investigations that the OIG does is available to the public. They're sealed or restricted or whatever you want to call it. And so the email from this lady at the Health Eligibility Center says, you know something? They were wrong to take your health care away. They didn't understand early separation. She admits in the email that I have, I printed it out, it's somewhere around here. She admitted in the email that my early separation was valid and that it was not from anything that I did wrong and that I was allowed medical treatment. The man, they named the VA employee and said that, yeah, he didn't understand. So he went by what other people said. He's been terminated. I don't care about the lower people. I want the people with the power that did this.
Absolutely.
So... But it's still conflicting. The VA is still lying because right before I got that email from this young lady, she's like, we're very sorry, this was wrong, you were entitled to due process. So I requested all of my records from the Health Eligibility Center. Every piece, I said, I want every shred of documentation you have. I want to know if you talked to CID, if you've talked to the Army, Department of Defense. I said, I want it all. And so they're like, okay, we don't have any communication with CID or blah, blah, blah. So you can see on they call it a workload. Before they even canceled my appointments, Oklahoma City VA was already trying to get rid of me. That started in July. Then the Health Eligibility Center stood up for me and said, no, I am eligible. I did a means test. I was poor at that time. Like, what veteran isn't? But I was very poor, and I qualified. But 2 weeks later, Oklahoma City VA again contacted the HEC. Make her ineligible. She shouldn't be getting care. The Health Eligibility said no. The third time, the HEC said no. 2 days later, an unnamed executive employee from the Secretary's office went into my record. They changed my treating location from Oklahoma City VA all the way to Madison. So they forged the document and then wrote not eligible and then wrote not a veteran. And it stayed like that. Then when I go down the list, it shows me everything they've mailed, emailed, phone calls that they've made. There's no appeal rights given at all. Then in 2011, after my challenge from CID came back, and forensic photos and all the medical stuff came up, somebody in the Health Eligibility Center learned about it. And they're like, well, obviously she didn't do anything wrong. They made me eligible. 2 days later, that same executive employee went back in and changed it to not eligible. But they did it in such a way that it didn't extend appeal rights to me. And that's how it went.
See, now everything that they do, anytime somebody accesses your record, it's supposed to be logged. And I recently found out this year, which hurts my feelings. I wish I had known about this many years ago. There's something called the SPAR, which is the Sensitive Patient Access Report. And what that is anytime anybody accesses your personal information, it logs the time, day, the person's name, their position, the topic, and the description, such as why they were doing it, and any notes associated with that. So it's sensitive because it's your personal information. That way people have to have a certain level of security to safeguard that information. However, personally, when I found out about this, I put in my FOIA request, which is the Freedom of Information Act request, and I requested my SPAR, and I immediately got a reply saying, well, we're not able to give you anything because your record was never labeled sensitive, but it is now. So as of April 2019, so in the future, if you want your SPAR, then you can request it, but it's only going to be from April 2019 to present. And my rebuttal to that was, actually, sensitive refers to the personal private information that's within my record, social, who I am, so on and so forth, and it doesn't refer to a labeling. So the VA is trying to use that to shut me up, because most veterans are going to sit there and say, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess it's not labeled sensitive. No, that's not how it works. So they're trying to cover their tracks, because if you can prove somebody's accessing your record and why, then you'll be able to prove everything with your timeline to show, yeah, well, why is all of a sudden is it showing that somebody entered my record, but everything after that is been deleted, and then all of a sudden there's another access, but that information's deleted as well. There's no comments, there's no topics, and all that information has to be put in to it goes into that system every time they access the record. So somebody has to physically go in there and actually remove that information, which means it's a higher level person that has to go in to remove information. So that's covering your bases, and it's highly illegal, which is another reason why they do not want me to be able to access that report. But it clearly shows that they're not quick on the moral side of the house, nor are they ethical. And it doesn't bode well for the average veteran, because we tend to not want to cause any sort of ripples. You know, we do as we're told. We go to appointments when we're told to go. When the doctor says you don't need any further testing, we believe that doctor. And then 10 years down the road, you know, if you had got this testing, you're being told from a civilian, if you get this testing, it could have greatly enhanced your quality of life. But because the VA didn't do anything, you're not going to have a very good life. And that's unfair to any person, never mind a veteran. It's definitely unfair to a veteran. But this is how the VA operates.
Yes,
and it is insane.
They target whistleblowers more. And, you know, I didn't ask for this. You know, I could get it, but I really didn't ask for it. And it was was somebody's perception and their judgment that it wasn't even facts. People were making an opinion based on hearsay and not facts. And I got an email from the VA saying, well, yeah, do you want to know who accessed your record? There's a lady in Oklahoma City VA. She marked my file sensitive 5 years ago. They made it to where, allegedly, they put my file at a level 4. So Florida Department of Veterans Affairs can't get into it. The only people that can get into it are people that I've given consent to. And I had to sign a document saying, okay, like when I thought American Legion was helping me, I signed that.
Right.
Then when I fired them, I retracted it. So they said they put it at a level 4. I asked my privacy officer about, he said, he told me that it was documented, whoever goes into my file. He said that the testing itself, like your MRIs, your EEGs, your echoes, all that, it's not housed in the same system.
Right.
They have another server. When the Inspector General went through to find out who deleted my raw data, they found that the room was not secure and that anybody could have accessed it because during that time, you didn't have a CACS card to delete anything. You could just go in there, do whatever you want, and leave. No cameras, no security, no nothing. And so the only thing that you would have is maybe a paper document if it made it out, and it's your word against theirs.
Right.
And I was told by VA leadership in Washington that I need to get over this. It is huge injustice, but you know something, it doesn't matter now because your service connected. And I'm like, no, it does matter. I told them when I wrote equitable relief, I'm like, I've been homeless 4 times. And 3 of those times I had my daughters leaving out of the hotel, trying to drive them to school. And I mean, we had the hardest time ever. I'm like, they went as far, they took my service connection to alcohol rehab when I was eligible. Their reasoning, well, CID said nothing happened, so you don't really qualify, so we had to bill you. They took over $2,300. My gas, the electricity got cut off. This is in wintertime because I didn't have the money to pay them because the VA took my stuff. And once again, they didn't extend me any appeal rights. Like, let's say I really did owe that. You can ask the VA to have mercy. Please forgive it. Only now are they doing that because so many people have complained. But that crap is still on my credit report. When I didn't have medical care and I had to go to the emergency room because at that time I was falling a lot. I was fracturing my feet, my toes. I was just having a hard time. I had medical bills on my credit report over $4,500, $6,500. And it's still within the 7-year time period. They're still being reported. These people, they want their money. So my credit is now affected. When I asked for civilian health care for them to pay for it, they came back with, no, we can treat you here. But they're going to treat me on what they think I have a problem with, not what all the testing shows. They cherry pick the testing.
Sure, and they proved that with their decisions in the past, saying, no, we don't want to believe that specialist. We're going to make our own assertions, and that's why we're going to take you off this medication, which you should have been staying on in order to at least slow down the damages. It baffles me on how little the VA cares about the decisions that they make that you can prove that they did the wrong thing, and they tell you to get over it.
Yes, get over it. Because we can take money from you, everything from the past, but you can't collect on anything that we've done wrong.
Right.
And that's not right. I'm at my desk and I'm looking, and they've got primary pulmonary artery hypertension, and it's written in my medical record. The VA says that they're now willing to admit that I now have it, and I gave them the documents from the obliterative bronchiolitis. It's the same thing as popcorn lung. Only until, I don't even know who put pressure on them, but someone did, and they didn't let my CT scan be done in-house. My CT scan was done, and then they sent it to someone on the outside. The person on the outside said, yeah, it baffled me because all the other CT scans, they're like, she doesn't have ILD. Well, I do have ILD. It's just a broad range of diseases. It's restrictive lung disease, but specifically, they wrote in their report this year that the civilian that they sent it to, that I had ground glass opacity, just all this stuff. And then they're like, there's new changes. But then last year and the year before, they're like, she's got scarring. That's it. It's unremarkable. So by their their own admission, they're lying.
Right.
They're contradicting. But we're held to a higher standard than they are.
Absolutely. Well, that and they always put the fear into you, saying we can always take this away. So be happy with what we've given you. I mean, well, and they prove that with the comment by saying, why are you so concerned about that now? Your service connected. You should be happy with that and shut your mouth.
No, I can't do that.
Exactly.
So, what's going to happen to my kids? I thought that I was going to be able at least to see my two oldest daughters graduate from high school. That is now very, very questionable.
Right.
So these people, and this is the stuff I think about at home. So I make videos that are only visible to me for my children. I have 3 girls. But what about Samantha? She's going to be 4 in July.
Right.
I'll see her go to pre-K, I think, in kindergarten, and maybe first grade. But I won't get to see any of my grandchildren. I won't get to be mother of the bride. These people are traveling extensively. I want to go to Jerusalem before I die. And I'm just thinking,
I know it's
why
not.
they do this? Why they do this? And so, and I have the documents. Like, when I got Service Connected the first time, Congressman Lankford's office is like, hey, what kind of discharge you got in your system for this veteran? Yeah, it's misconduct. And so another fax came, and they're like, you need to fix this. 20 minutes later, another fax came. Her discharge has been corrected. But then on the DOD side, until 2015, they still had misconduct.
So they told the politician what he wanted to hear in order for him to lay off the pressure.
Yep. So, yeah, and Congressman Lankford, he has the same staff now as a senator. They are Republican, and they're sincere about helping veterans. They're sincere about helping. I've never seen such passion-driven people before. Those people really do care. They really get in the mud with their veterans. They really do what they need to do. I'm still in contact with some of the staff there, and I'm like, I'm telling you this so you can help other veterans, and they're like, thank you. They know my case very well, and I mean, his office, the people there, they listen. People in Florida, they don't care. They don't give a damn at all. They're like, yeah, they just, I mean.
Tell you what, I definitely, I want people to understand that the reason why I am just fueled to start this podcast is, in the shadows, I've been helping my fellow veterans, making sure that my name's never mentioned because the VA has my name targeted. And I've been able to help lots of veterans avoid what I've had to go through and continue to go through. And what fuels me is, there's hundreds of thousands of us that exist that have lots of horrible experiences. There are some veterans that have awesome experiences. So this podcast isn't just for the horror stories. It's also for, I went to such and such VA and I mean, it was awesome. I still get great care. I mean, I want to hear about that as well, but we need to start becoming organized. And that's the main reason for me starting this podcast is so we get organized enough where this kind of bullying that the VA likes to do, they don't get away with it any longer and people are actually held accountable. Now, the VA likes to hide employees or shift them to another location so they can't be identified. Like when a director is caught messing with the numbers saying that they're processing more veterans than what they really are. Well, rather than getting fired, they're just put to as a director in another location. They don't lose any pay and their move is paid for and they get their 6-figure salaries. And I've tracked many times where the VA has literally forced a retirement. So therefore, that person can't be held by law. And that's when it's been exposed that the VA was going to be brought to Congress to answer to why this employee did this, this, and this. So the VA quickly retires that person so they can be like, well, he's no longer an employee or she's no longer an employee. And it's just rushed aside. So the main push on this podcast is to give each veteran the voice that they need and for us to be organized. And there's a documentary in the works, not from myself, only because I don't live on the East Coast any longer, but there are veterans that are moving in that direction to create a documentary to actually expose what we as veterans go through and what we're told versus what actually happens. And it's an important message to get out there because if it's not put out in the media, which you're not going to see it in today's media, but if it's not put out there for people to actually see what the reality is, everybody lives with their head in the sand thinking that, oh, our veterans are getting taken care of.
No, they're not.
Absolutely. Absolutely not. And it's a shame. I've had it in a couple closed groups that I belong to. I've mentioned the fact to many veterans and said, look, I feel your pain. I really do. I live through this every single day. So I do feel your pain. However, I'm also a firm believer in doing something about it. In other words, I'm not going to sit here and complain about something if I'm not willing to put any effort in. I mean, I'm not even asking for a lot of effort. I'm asking for minimal effort to become that one voice that they have to listen to. So that's my big push, and I can't even thank you enough, because it takes a lot of guts to come forward, especially with your story, which is a horrific story, and it's ongoing, and it's my goal to make sure that the VA doesn't do anything like that to you ever again, because you shouldn't have to fight for the things that are substantiated by medical testing, and especially when it's been proven that you were coerced into filling out statements. You weren't given a TBI screening when you should have because of the explosion. You were exposed to burn pits. You had to burn human feces, and you had to burn jet fuel. And you did so on a consistent basis before anybody actually knew that that'd be hazardous. But so, which means you didn't have any protection, no ventilators, no masks, nothing. And then you were overworked as a punishment on top of the punishment, and then covered up because somebody was a buddy to somebody else. So it's, unfortunately, we know this to be the reality, but what people need to understand is we always do what we're told when we're in the military. If we're told we're going to have go get shots, we go and get our shots, because if we don't, we're going to be threatened with, like you said, an Article 15 or NJP, and we worry about our future. We don't want to get in trouble. So what do? We go and we get our shots. We go and we take our malaria medication. We go and we do this because that's what we were told to do. But when it comes down to it, it's only because we lack the knowledge, because we're never given that knowledge.
Absolutely.
So you deserve not only a much better quality of life, but you deserve to not ever have to worry about medical care or have to worry about anything dealing with the VA. Hopefully, once we get this ball rolling, that'll be a lot easier. I'm still requesting congressional meetings. I'm not getting any answers back because, of course, they don't want to see somebody who actually has proof that people have lied to them and that they're going to have to hold them accountable. So I'm just going to keep putting the pressure on until finally I'm heard, and this will be for public consumption as well. So, Christina, once again, I want to thank you for being able to come forward, because I'm sure your story is going to, many people are going to be able to relate to it, and hopefully that'll get more people to come forward and tell their story as well. And with enough people, with enough veterans coming forth to actually stand their ground, hopefully we'll have a little bit more power against the big VA beast as it is today.
Yes, I most certainly agree. Even if nothing can be done in my case, but maybe, whatever the court decides, I'm almost done with my complaint. I had to get the binders and put it together. The filing fee is $400. My husband is helping me pay half. But maybe, just maybe, that they can use what we've been through to spare someone else. And I wrote it in my will that I did not want my daughters going in the military, that I wanted them to sit down with a counselor, and I wanted them to look at all the bad things that the military does. And I understand we have to go to war and some things cannot be helped, but the way that they treat us is really horrible. I don't want my daughters to experience it. And I don't ever, ever want them to step foot in a VA medical center, ever. So I put that in my will, because the military is not good enough for my daughters.
Well, that also brings up a very important point. On my introduction submission that I posted, I guess that would be my episode 1.
Yeah.
I clearly stated that the selflessness that veterans have towards each other to try to help. That was actually the first thing I actually said to the Congresswoman, was when I first met her at her office, and she came in and introduced herself, and I looked at her and I said, it's too late for me, but I'm hoping with what I present you, it will take care of my teammates who get out of the military after me. And she looked at me and she's like, stop right there. Why are you even saying that? And I was like, well, because they've already got me targeted. So I've already started to feel what their retaliation is. So I want to make sure that my teammates behind me do not have to experience the same thing. And because of our job in the military, I want to make sure that they're covered on the physical side, because of the tests that came out that prove our profession causes lots of physical damage. And she ended up telling me, further down the line, she's like, it blew me away that you were willing to maintain the abuse and treatment from the VA just so your teammates wouldn't have to. And that was part of my point in my introduction, was that we don't think of ourselves. We think of, hey, if at all possible, if my story can help one veteran get treatment that's fair to them and helps them, then it's not wasted. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
We're on the same line. Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't understand that. When veterans commit suicide on VA property, it's very clear to me on why they do that. They don't do that because they have no other place to commit suicide. They do that because that's the only way they can bring attention and be guaranteed that attention is going to be given to that VA facility. And it's been proven in many different locations. And that commander who was sitting on top of his his medical records, who shot himself, committed suicide right on the steps of the VA property, right on the steps, and had wrote up a big old letter on why. Clearly supports exactly what I was saying. He did so because it was the only way for people to take it seriously on the abuse and treatment and mistreatment from the VA. And it's their last selfless act that they do in order to try to help everybody else. And it sucks that it comes to the point where they feel the only way they're going to get relief is by taking their own life, and then make the decision that, hey, I'm going to do this on the property because I can't take it anymore, and I'm hoping this will help somebody else who can. And that's a horrible way to bring the attention to that VA facility, but it's the only way people are listening. So,
well, I can definitely tell you that if worse comes to worse, I won't tell anybody, but it won't be at my VA. It's going to be on the steps of where the secretary is doing his work. He doesn't want to own it, then he can face it on the steps.
Yeah,
because
he doesn't like to.
It started with him. I mean, I'm not suicidal now. I don't plan to be anytime soon. But if I was going to do it, it would be at the steps of where the secretary is. Because he's responsible for these employees. He's responsible for the health care and the benefit. If he's not doing his job, then I've tried to put it in front of his face. Mailing it, faxing it, sending it to the Veterans Affairs Committee, the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, subcommittees, and these people are totally oblivious. It's like they don't care. If it does not affect them, then they don't care. Because it's not their daughters, it's not their sons, their nieces.
And guaranteed if it was their son, daughter, nieces, or nephews, that would be solved a whole lot quickly. A whole lot quicker, you know? Well, Christina, we will definitely be staying in touch. That way you can give me any sort of updates, and I will add that on to future podcasts. And I will keep you updated on things that are transpiring that you may also want to be involved in. So that way we are attacking on multiple fronts.
Okay.
So,
and I'll be here for the time being.
Okay.
So Sean has your email in case something should happen. He has a bunch of emails to tell people when I'm dead. I mean, that sounds horrible, but I mean...
No, it's sad. I ended up making that comment on social media as well, that, you know, it's a sad day when we have to use that as insurance, saying, hey, look, if you don't hear from me and you get an anonymous email from my email account that says certain things, no, it wasn't me. And you'll understand why. And it's pretty sad that we actually have to put that insurance policy in place, but it's reality for a lot of us.
Yes.
Well, fingers crossed that better things are on the horizon, and I'm not one to sit on my hands, nor am I one to back down from a fight, regardless of who's trying to come at me. So once again, huge thank you for telling your story, because it's not an easy story to tell. It's definitely not. And I'm glad I was able to put it on a podcast so it can enlighten anybody and everybody who's willing to listen. So thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.
I will. I'll try to.
Well, I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye. I can't even begin to express how aggravated that I feel that somebody has to experience what you just heard. But once again, it's a reality, and it's what occurs to many of our veterans, and it's a shame that they have to experience it. And, you know, our reality is not a pretty one at times, but it is our reality. And instead of sitting there stomping our feet and shaking our fist to the sky and asking why me, we decide to do something about it. So first off, hats off to Christina for having the guts to tell her story, because it's not easy. And mad respect to those that do podcasts podcast because I'm trying to get over my hatred of my own voice on recording, but my hatred for veteran abuse definitely weighs more than my hatred of hearing my voice on recording. So once again, this is As One Voice. That was our interview with Christina and the horrific experiences that she had. And hopefully some of you can learn how things are actually done behind the scenes and the problems that we face. So with that, I'm going to say be safe and we'll talk to you soon.